September 17th, 1943, Camp Weingarten, Missouri. Obergefreiter Klaus Zimmermann pressed his face against the chain-link fence, watching something that violated every principle of military security he had ever learned. 3 Italian soldiers, still in their tattered uniforms, were walking through the main gate. No guards, no weapons pointed at their backs, no dogs. Just 3 enemy soldiers strolling past American sentries who waved at them like they were neighbors heading to the grocery store. One of the Italians called out something in broken English to the guard. The American laughed and responded. They were joking. Prisoners and captors were joking like old friends. Zimmermann turned to his fellow German POW, Feldwebel Ernst Müller, whose mouth hung open in disbelief. "They're letting them leave," Müller whispered. "Just walk out." "Where are they going?" The guard noticed the Germans watching and walked over, his expression friendly despite addressing enemy combatants. "Those guys," he said, pointing at the departing Italians, "they're going into town. Movie theater, maybe get some dinner, they'll be back by 10, always are." Zimmermann couldn't process what he was hearing. "But they are prisoners of war." The American shrugged. "Yeah, but Italy switched sides. They're co-belligerents now. We're all fighting the same enemy." He paused, then added with a knowing smile, "Your enemy, not theirs anymore." What Zimmermann was witnessing would become one of the most extraordinary experiments in prisoner treatment in military history. Following Italy's surrender on September 8, 1943, and subsequent declaration as a co-belligerent nation, the United States implemented an honor system for Italian POWs that would have been unthinkable under any previous military doctrine. Over 50,000 Italian prisoners would experience freedoms that shattered German assumptions about American military thinking, about the nature of imprisonment, and about how democracies approached former enemies who chose cooperation over continued resistance. The story of Italian POWs on honor wasn't just about military policy. It was about the fundamental difference between totalitarian and democratic approaches to warfare. It revealed how Americans viewed humanity, trust, and redemption in ways that Nazi ideology could never comprehend. And it provided a daily visible lesson to German POWs about the consequences of cooperation versus continued defiance, a lesson delivered not through propaganda, but through the simple sight of Italians walking freely into American towns while Germans remained behind barbed wire. The context for this unprecedented arrangement began with Italy's catastrophic military collapse. By September 1943, Italy had lost North Africa, Sicily had fallen, and Allied forces were landing on the Italian mainland. Marshal Pietro Badoglio's government signed an armistice on September 8th, and on October 13th, Italy declared war on its former German ally. Suddenly, the 51,156 Italian military personnel held in American POW camps occupied a legal limbo. They were no longer enemy combatants, but they weren't exactly allies either. They were former enemies who had switched sides, a category that military regulations hadn't adequately addressed. The War Department's initial response was cautious. Italians would remain in POW camps, but receive improved treatment pending a final determination of their status. But local camp commanders, facing labor shortages and observing the Italians' eager willingness to cooperate, began experimenting with more relaxed restrictions. At Camp Monticello in Arkansas, the camp commander, Colonel Robert E. Thompson, took the first radical step. On October 1, 1943, he allowed 20 Italian POWs to leave camp unguarded to work on a nearby farm. They were simply told to return by evening. All 20 returned on time. The experiment was expanded systematically. By November 1943, selected Italian POWs at camps across America were being granted what became known as honor privileges. These men, screened for cooperative attitudes and anti-fascist sentiment, were allowed to leave camps for work details, recreation, and eventually personal visits to nearby towns, all without guards, based solely on their word that they would return. The numbers grew rapidly. By January 1944, over 15,000 Italian POWs enjoyed honor privileges. By June 1944, that number exceeded 30,000. The American military was conducting the largest parole system in the history of warfare. German POWs watching this transformation struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. At Camp Weingarten, where both German and Italian POWs were housed in separate compounds, the contrast was stark and deliberate. Germans remained under standard POW restrictions: armed guards, regular roll calls, perimeter security, restricted movement. Italians, meanwhile, came and went with a freedom that seemed to mock military discipline. Obergefreiter Zimmermann kept a secret diary, discovered decades later in German archives, that documented his observations between September 1943 and his repatriation in 1946. His entries reveal the psychological impact of witnessing the honor system. September 20th, 1943. The Italians are leaving in groups now, 10, 20 at a time. They work in town, at farms, in factories. They walk past our compound twice daily. Some wave at us, others look away, perhaps ashamed. I don't know if they're ashamed of betraying Germany or ashamed that we're still locked up while they're free. October 3rd, 1943. I spoke with an Italian through the fence today. His name is Giuseppe, from Sicily. He works at a dairy farm 5 miles from camp. He walks there each morning, works 8 hours, walks back. No guards, no weapons. Just his word that he'll return. He says the farmer's family invites him to dinner sometimes. He's been to their church. I asked him, "Why don't you escape?" He looked at me like I was insane. "Escape to where?" he said. "This is better than anything in Italy. The war is ending. Germany is already lost. Why would I run from people treating me well?" The mechanics of the honor system revealed American pragmatism at its finest. Italian POWs granted honor privileges, signed a statement promising not to escape and to return to camp at designated times. That was it. A signature on a piece of paper. No chains, no guards, no constant surveillance. Just trust backed by the threat of losing privileges if violated. The violation rate was extraordinarily low. Army records show that between October 1943 and the end of the war, fewer than 400 Italian POWs on honor status attempted escape or failed to return from authorized absences. That's a compliance rate of 99.2%. Compare this to German POW escape attempts, which numbered 2,222 during the same period from a smaller population, and the difference in mindset became clear. At Fort Lawton in Washington state, Italian POWs on honor worked in Seattle shipyards alongside American civilians. They carried special identification cards and traveled on public buses. At Camp Ruston in Louisiana, Italians shopped in local stores, attended movies, and became familiar faces in the community. In California's Central Valley, Italian agricultural workers lived in farm labor camps separate from the main POW facilities under minimal supervision. These men experienced a freedom that approached normal civilian life, extraordinary for prisoners of war. The psychological warfare aspect was deliberate and devastating. American commanders understood that German POWs were watching. Every Italian walking freely past German compounds delivered a message more powerful than any propaganda broadcast. Cooperation brought reward. Defiance brought restrictions. The choice was theirs. Feldwebel Müller recorded a conversation with his German comrades in November 1943 that captured the growing cognitive dissonance. Helmut says the Americans are fools, that the Italians will betray them. Otto says the Italians have already betrayed everyone, so why should Americans be surprised? But Karl, who was captured at Kasserine, said something that made us uncomfortable. Maybe the Americans aren't fools. Maybe they understand something we don't. The Italians didn't really want to fight. Their government made them. Now they're free to choose, and they choose cooperation. What does that say about our position? The economic dimension of the honor system was substantial. Italian POWs on honor performed labor worth an estimated $60 million in 1944 alone, calculated at civilian wage rates. They harvested crops, worked in food processing plants, maintained infrastructure, and filled labor shortages across agricultural America. But unlike German POWs, who worked under Geneva Convention compulsion, Italians worked willingly, often with enthusiasm. The quality of their work exceeded German POW labor consistently. Farmers requesting labor specifically asked for Italian workers, citing their positive attitudes and lack of sabotage. The social integration of Italian POWs shocked German observers most profoundly. By 1944, Italian POWs were dating American women. They were attending church services with American families. They were becoming part of communities in ways that violated every Nazi principle about racial hierarchy and military discipline. In Trinidad, Colorado, local Italian-American families essentially adopted Italian POWs, inviting them to Sunday dinners, weddings, and baptisms. The men on honor became temporary family members, bridging the gap between prisoner and person in ways that made their status as POWs almost incidental. Zimmermann's diary entries from this period revealed the psychological impact on German prisoners. December 12, 1943. Giuseppe came by the fence today to show us a photograph. He was at an American family's Christmas celebration. In the photo, he's sitting at their dinner table, wearing civilian clothes they gave him, smiling with their children on his lap. He said they're teaching him English and helping him write to his family in Sicily. I looked at that photograph for a long time after he left. We Germans are the master race, superior to Italians in every way according to our teachings. Yet Giuseppe sits at American tables while we eat behind wire. What does this mean? The honor system created a visible hierarchy among prisoners of war that reinforced American strategic messaging. At the top were Italians on honor, enjoying near civilian status. Below them were compliant German POWs who received decent treatment within camp. At the bottom were defiant Nazis who faced isolation and reduced privileges. The Americans were showing that cooperation led to reward, a lesson in carrot and stick motivation that was impossible to miss. The honor system reached its apex in 1944 when the War Department authorized Italian service units, essentially military labor battalions, composed of Italian prisoners of war who volunteered for non-combat service, supporting the American war effort. These units, eventually numbering over 34,000 men, wore special uniforms with ISU insignia, received American Army pay rates, and lived under military rather than POW regulations. They were no longer prisoners in any meaningful sense. They were laborers contributing to the defeat of their former German allies. Specific stories emerged that became legendary among both Italian and German POWs. At Camp Trinidad in Colorado, Italian POW Constantino De Angelis saved an American child from drowning while on honor working at a local swimming pool. The town held a ceremony honoring him, presenting him with a watch and key to the city. German POWs read about this in camp newspapers and struggled to process it. An enemy prisoner receiving public honors from Americans for saving an American life. The contrast with German POW treatment was stark and deliberate. Germans who arrived at camps expecting harsh treatment discovered adequate conditions meeting Geneva Convention standards, but nothing approaching Italian privileges. German POWs could not leave camps unguarded under any circumstances. They could not work in towns or socialize with civilians beyond minimal necessary contact. They received no honor privileges regardless of cooperation level. This differential treatment was strategic psychological warfare. Americans wanted Germans to see what cooperation could bring while making clear that Germany's continued belligerence excluded them from such benefits. Muller's diary captured a conversation among German POWs in March 1944 that revealed the strategy's effectiveness. We debated today whether we should have surrendered earlier like Italy did. Would Americans trust us on honor if we had? Hans says no, Americans hate Germans more than Italians. Fritz says it's because Italians are racially closer to Americans. Both are Mediterranean types. But Werner, who studied in America before the war, said something different. Americans don't care about race as much as regime. Italy overthrew Mussolini and switched sides. If Germany overthrew Hitler and surrendered, Americans would treat us the same way. It's not about ethnicity, it's about which side you're on. We were quiet after that. German POW attitudes toward Italian prisoners evolved throughout the war in ways that revealed ideology crumbling against reality. Initially, most Germans viewed Italians with contempt for surrendering and switching sides. They saw Italian privileges as proof of American foolishness and Italian spinelessness. But as the war progressed and German military position deteriorated, contempt gradually gave way to envy and grudging recognition. Zimmermann's diary entries tracked this evolution. June 15, 1944. News of the D-Day invasion has changed everything. Giuseppe says the war will be over by Christmas. He might be right. I find myself watching the Italians differently now. They chose the winning side. They're free while we remain prisoners. Who was wiser? August 3rd, 1944. I spoke with Giuseppe at length today. He invited me to walk the perimeter with him during his free time. I was bitter, asked him how he could betray Italy's alliance with Germany. He said something I can't stop thinking about. We didn't betray an alliance. We escaped a prison. Mussolini made us Germany's slaves. The Americans offered us freedom. I chose freedom, wouldn't you? The honor system's success rate defied Nazi assumptions about human nature. Nazi ideology taught that humans were fundamentally treacherous, that only force maintained order, that trust was weakness to be exploited. The Italian POW experience disproved this completely. When treated with dignity and offered trust, over 99% of Italians honored their word. They returned from towns, they worked without supervision, they obeyed restrictions voluntarily. This suggested something that German POWs found increasingly difficult to dismiss. Perhaps American understanding of human nature was more accurate than Nazi teaching. Perhaps cooperation was more natural than conflict. Perhaps trust could be a strength rather than a weakness. By late 1944, some German POWs began explicitly requesting similar honor programs. They argued they were personally anti-Nazi, they would cooperate fully, they deserved similar treatment as Italians. These requests were consistently denied. American policy was clear. Germany remained a belligerent nation fighting against the United States. Until Germany surrendered, German nationals could not receive honor privileges regardless of individual attitudes. This policy maintained the clear cause and effect message. National surrender led to honor treatment. Continued national belligerence led to continued confinement. Individual attitudes mattered less than national status. The lesson was impossible to miss. Want freedom. Convince your nation to surrender. The post-war fate of Italian POWs demonstrated the long-term benefits of cooperation. As the war ended, Italians who had served in Italian service units were given priority for immigration to the United States. Many married American women they'd met during their captivity. Others returned to Italy with skills, savings, and connections that aided reconstruction. The Italian government publicly thanked the United States for humane treatment of its POWs, citing the honor system as evidence of American respect for Italian people despite the war. German POWs, conversely, remained in camps until 1946, then returned to a destroyed Germany with no special privileges, no immigration opportunities, no gratitude from their government which no longer existed. The contrast in outcomes was as stark as the contrast in treatment during captivity. Zimmerman's final diary entries before repatriation in March 1946 revealed complete ideological transformation. February 20th, 1946. Giuseppe is leaving today. He married an American girl from Trinidad. He showed me their wedding photographs. He'll stay in America, become a citizen, bring his family from Sicily eventually. He thanked me for our conversations through the wire, said I helped him practice English. I thanked him for showing me what was possible. He asked what I meant. I told him, "You showed me that cooperation works better than conquest. That trust can be stronger than force, that Americans might understand human nature better than we did." He smiled and said, "You Germans could have learned this lesson much cheaper." He's right. The final statistics of the Italian POW honor system told a story that contradicted every Nazi assumption. Over 50,000 Italian POWs participated. 99.2% compliance rate with honor terms. 0 recorded incidents of Italian POWs committing crimes during honor privileges. Over 34,000 served in Italian service units. Approximately 1,000 married American citizens. Economic contribution estimated at $85 million total. These numbers represented more than administrative success. They represented a fundamental validation of democratic principles versus totalitarian ones. Trust could work. Cooperation could flourish. Former enemies could become friends, even allies, when treated with dignity and offered genuine choice. The Nazis had taught that humans were fundamentally vicious, that only force maintained order, that different peoples could never cooperate as equals. The Italian POW honor system disproved every principle through simple empirical demonstration. When German POWs returned home in 1946, they brought memories of what they had witnessed. Italian prisoners walking freely through American towns, former enemies treated with trust and dignity, a system based on voluntary cooperation that worked better than forced compliance. Some dismissed it as American naivety that happened to succeed through luck. But others, like Zimmerman, carried lessons that shaped their approach to Germany's reconstruction. The men who had watched Italians succeed under an honor system understood that Germany's future required cooperation, not continued defiance. That democracy offered opportunities that tyranny never could. That trust, when earned and honored, created better outcomes than force. The Italian POW honor system remains one of World War II's least known but most significant experiments in prisoner treatment. It demonstrated that military necessity and humanitarian treatment could align rather than conflict. It proved that psychological operations through actions could be more effective than propaganda through words. It showed that democracies could defeat dictatorships not just militarily, but ideologically, by demonstrating superior understanding of human nature and better systems for organizing society. Most importantly, it provided a daily visible lesson to German POWs about the consequences of their choices. Every Italian walking past German compounds without guards delivered the same message. Cooperation works, trust is rewarded, freedom is possible, choose wisely. Klaus Zimmermann returned to Germany in March 1946, settled in Frankfurt, and became a teacher. In 1975, he donated his secret diary to the German Federal Archives with a note explaining why. "I want Germans to know what I learned in America. That trust is not weakness, that cooperation is not surrender, that treating others with dignity costs nothing but creates everything. I learned this watching Italian prisoners walk freely through Missouri while I remained behind wire. The Americans didn't teach me this through lectures. They taught me by showing me daily what worked and what didn't. I hope future Germans learn this lesson more cheaply than we did." His diary remains in the archives today, a testament to the power of simple trust to transform human understanding. The honor system had created more than compliant prisoners. It had created witnesses to democracy's strength, men who saw with their own eyes that American principles weren't naivety but sophistication, that treating people with dignity wasn't weakness but wisdom. In the end, that might have been the honor system's greatest victory. Not the economic contribution or the compliance rates, but the minds changed through undeniable observation. The Italian POWs walked into town without guards and always returned. That simple fact accomplished what 1,000 propaganda broadcasts never could. It proved that the American way worked.